And hello everyone, welcome back to another video. In this video, we'll be implementing both sign up and login into our website. But before we get started, just a massive shout out to the channel's very first member, Daniel McNulty. Thank you so much for joining, and I really appreciate all the support you're giving me. Alright, so let's jump right into it. First, we will need to just create a sign up. And let's just create an index.tsx and sign up. There we go. We can also then just add our sign up page to our routes. So here we go, and we just say that there is our sign up. So sign up page. All right, so now we have our sign up page and it's ready to go. We can visit, link, everything. So let's first design our page. So let's go space. And what space will do is it will just align things for us nicely. So we just want direction to be vertical. And it will also make sure everything has nice spacing in between and whatnot. Optionally, you could use flex if you prefer flex. But for simple styling like this, space is perfect. Then we can add a typography dot title with a level of 2 and just say create your account. Then we're going to create a couple inputs. We want one for the email. We want one for the username because we want each person to have their own username. We want one for the first name, the last name, and then their password. So let's start off by creating a use state for all of these. So use states, for those of you who are beginners to React, is pretty much a way to store a variable without it having to reset every time the page re-renders. So here we go and call this email and Bob's your uncle. Create another use state. We can call this username. Another use state. First name. Use state. Last name. Use state. Password. And then we can of course just import use state. Then here we can create an input, also from design. And this input will have a value for email. So whatever is in here is going to be displayed inside of our input. And then on change, we can say e, and that sets set email to e.target.value. So we get the value that is in here, and then we set it into the email here. That you cannot just pass in e because e is of type HTML input element, not of type string, which value is. Alright, I'm going to copy and paste this. So we have 5 in total. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just add some nice spacing to each. Then I'm just going to copy all of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, paste. And copy all of these again. 1, 2, 3, 4, paste. And boom, we're pretty much done. We're just going to add a couple of extra things. So with this, actually let's run this so you can first see how it looks. So npm start. Going to open up Brave. And here we go. Give us a refresh. Now if we go to the sign up page, we get this create your account. It has a couple of inputs here and as simple as that. We might just want to add some placeholders because I don't really know what any of these fields mean. So it might be best to just add a placeholder or 2 here. Placeholder, and I'm just going to copy this and throw it in here. Make it Pascal case and then just make it sentence. There we go. Okay, so first name, last name, password, all of this is here. Now if we save that, it will clearly indicate which is which. Then here with the username, our usernames will start with an @ symbol. So we can say add-on before, and this will just put an @ here because now they will know that their username starts with an @. Then finally we can add our button, also from design. And this will be of type primary. Note if you want to set the HTML type, so if you like using forms, the HTML type would be this. And then you can say button, reset, or submit. Just in case you were wanting to do that. And this will be sign up. And there we go. There's our sign up page. Again, not a front end tutorial, so I won't be doing too much with that. And then of course, if they want to log in, we need to give them the option to switch to the login page instead. Alternatively, it is possible to create both a login and sign up page on the same page, But I feel that's getting out of the scope and we're not going to be doing that. It's just going to be 2 separate pages. So just typography, and then you don't have to specify a title or even dot text or whatnot, but some of them do have extra features like editable, and this will make the text itself editable that you can later save in the database and whatnot, but we don't need that at the moment. Already have an account, and just make sure there's a space here, and we add a button which is of type link, so this will make the button look like a link, and then this will be login. Now here we go, already have an account, login. None of these buttons work yet, but they're there. That's the important part. Now we need to make the button actually work. So we need to implement it. So first, actually, let's implement that login because it's so simple. Const, and here we'll need to get the location and then navigate. And this comes from use location of router. So very similar to how you would do it in React Router if you're coming from there. Just in this case, you get both from use location instead of having to use navigate. And in here, it works exactly the same. So if we go on click, then we can say navigate. And here's where our routing system really shows its power. So we say public routes dot login dot path. This is massive because if we ever in the future, when our code base is 100,000 lines of code, if we ever want to change any of these routes, we just change it here. That's where this is so powerful, because now you have one place you change it and it will change everywhere. Where if you were to manually type here login, login, if you were to manually type this, then it wouldn't work quite as you expect if you need to change it in the future, because now you need to find all of the places where this is being called. And that is why our method of routing is so powerful, because all of it's already here for us. Alright, so let's continue. So let's go to our handle submit, where this will be our function that will handle submitting, of course. So const handle submit, and I already have something that will do much of this for us, but it's a little bit outdated, so I'm not going to use it. And this will just be a function where we need to do a couple things. First, we need to clean any of the inputs before we send it to the server. We'll clean it on the server again and check it on the server as well. But it's good to do it from here just because it might save some time, because you don't want to ping the server just for a server to say, hey, your things aren't quite right. So const cleaned email is equal to email.trim. Const cleaned username is equal to username.trim. And we're just going to do this for everything except the password. So this will just remove any of the spacing before and after any of this text. Then we want to just do a couple checks. So first of all, we want to make sure that it is in fact a valid email. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install a package called netsu.js utils. I'm going to make this very clear. This is a very optional package. This is a package I created, so I maintain it. And pretty much, if you don't want to use it, you don't have to use it. All of these things are just convenient things like removing undefined from an array, limiting text to only be a specific size, capitalizing the first letter, formatting dates, and so on and so forth. You don't need this at all. In fact, if you don't want to follow this tutorial without it, feel free to go without it. I'm just going to use it because it does make my life a lot easier whenever I put it in a project. So here we go, Meteor, and just npm install that. Once it is added, we can go here and just say if not email regex, which comes from the package, which just contains an email regex that we can then use to check if an email is valid. The code is also open source, so if you wanted to go to the GitHub and actually check it out, there you go. If you wanted to go to source, you can go to regex, index, and here email regex. I'm terrible with regex, so this is what I always use for email rejexing because it works. Then here we just say .test, and we test it on the cleaned email. This will check, hey, if this email is an invalid email, that's what the regex will check for. Then we want to return message from ant_design.error, email is invalid. And we can actually test this. If we take this handle submit and we place it in our signup, so on click, Just put handle submit there. Note we don't need to do this because we're not passing in specific data into its brackets here. So we can just call it directly. Note, don't do this. This will call it immediately. Don't put a brackets here. Only time we put brackets there is if you have this. Then you can put brackets there. Now just make sure to actually start your server and to save your file. Now if we were to give this a refresh, just make sure everything's up to date. If I put a regular email in here, it will work perfectly fine. But if I put some weird stuff in here that should not be here, it's going to say, hey, that email is invalid. For example, let's remove that @ symbol. Now it's no longer an email, so we'll just say, hey, that's not valid. And there we go. So just a very simple check to make sure things are valid. Next, we want to give the password a minimum length. So if there's no clean password, so just password.length is less than 8, meaning if it's less than 8 characters, then return message.error. Password is too short. Then if cleaned username dot length is less than 3, so they need at least 3 letters in their username, then return message.error. Username is too short. And finally, we're just going to check the first name because we want the last name to be an optional one. We're not going to check its length or anything like that. And in here, we're just going to say if check string empty. This will check if the string is empty. So this is considered an empty string because there's nothing in here. So this is just a wrapper for something like .trim .length less than 1. That's pretty much all this is for. So it's a nice wrapper so we don't have to type that. And we just say cleaned first name because the first name is in fact required. So if the first name is empty, we'll return message.error. First name is required. Cool, there we go. We're not going to do anything with the last name yet because it's optional. We don't really care too much other than cleaning it to make sure it's doesn't have any padding next to it and stuff. Next, we're going to start processing. So we will also need to just have a loading checker, which we'll not be implementing at the moment, but it is there for if you want to put it in a loader. So use state logging in, and this will be false by default. And then if we're here, we can just say set logging in to true. There we go. Now here's where it gets important because now we need to implement user signup. So now we're going to have to create a couple things. So in API, we can create a new folder called users. We can create a new folder inside of that called methods, which we'll get to later. And in users, we can create a new folder called models.ts. This will define how our user looks. So Meteor already has a user model defined for us, but I find it to be a little bit lackluster and doesn't quite work with how I like to see my user model built. So I'm going to extend it, or rather implement it, so that we have something we can work with more. So let's go here and say export class user model. This can also be a default export if you want it to be. And let's implement meteor.user and just import Meteor as well so you don't get any errors. And meteor.user is the default model. So if we go here, we'll see, there we go. This is the default model they have. And user profile is just a random empty vessel there. So just take note of that. I'm going to copy that because we're implementing it. So this is just TypeScript stuff. We're implementing it so we can redefine how things look. So here, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to force an ID. So we're going to say, yes, there is an ID in every single one of these. We are pretty much forcing that. The username, I don't really care about the username. And whilst we do have a username, I'm not going to store it in this username field. However, feel free to do it because even if you do, it won't change your code a lot from mine. So feel free to set your username in here. It's perfectly fine. It's just how I like to do things. I like all of my things to be in the profile, just to keep things simple. Then with emails, we want there to be a forced email system. So we are going to force them all to have emails. Mainly because we will not be implementing other means of signing up and logging in. So we will not be implementing like logging in with GitHub or Google or things like that. So we will force them to have an email. So you can remove that. And having the Meteor's default user email, so meteor.user email is perfectly fine. This just means they will have an address and verified. So we will force this. So this doesn't technically force it, but this does say that this will be in the database. So we're telling us that this is definitely going to be in a database. Then here again, we're going to say there will be a created at. And then services, specifically just so we know how it looks, will be password string. Again, if you're using a different service to log in with, like Gmail or GitHub or whatnot, this might look a little bit different. And as for profile, we will say that each account will in fact have a profile, and we're not going to make it look like a model. Because I find that if you're going to have a massive object inside of another object, that object should instead be considered a table or something like that, or another collection. So this will be a string, because this will contain where our profile collection is located at. For those of you who are not familiar with MongoDB, pretty much all I'm saying is here we have our users. So users, insert here. However, these users, they do contain whatever they need. So this does contain like their username. So let's just put some more text here. Username, or not username, email, and whatnot. So it does contain all of their stuff here. But we will have another one. And it will be linked to this one. So this here will be the user profile. And this will contain the user or the first name. It will also contain the username, the last name, profile, photo, and so on and so forth. And I feel this is a much better way to do it, because then you do have like this little box here which contains the basic user information of a user account. But then you have this much bigger box here that if you request it, you can also request in just specific data from the box to make things a little bit easier. This is just my coding philosophy, because I come from SQL, where having tables is a big part of it, where you don't want to nest things in more things. You want tables where you just link things together. And this is where my mindset comes from, because I feel MongoDB is very powerful, but in the hands of the wrong people, it turns into a big mess. So with this is a perfect model that everybody can follow. If you're going to have a big object inside of another object, don't do that. Just rather make another object where you can store it in. And take note, this profile here, you could also just completely ignore it. This could be something you don't use at all. It depends on how you prefer it. I just want to have at least a profile field here, but you could remove it because it's not required to have this here. Next up, let's make a new folder, call it user profile. And here we want to actually create a new folder as well, call it methods. And then also just create another file here, call it models.ts. And this will contain how the user profile will look. So this is the part that we don't want to store here. We want to store it on its own little place. So we're going to create an interface, user profile model. It will have its own ID, which will be its unique identifier, a user ID to which it's linked to in the user. So again, you don't need this field here if you don't want it, because on the end of the day, you already have it here, because they will automatically link to each other. This will be the first name, which is a string, the last name, which is an optional string, so they don't need to pass any data in here, the username, which is a string and also needs to be unique, and photo, which is a photo model. And the photo model will just be for the profile photos, so we can just go export, interface, photo model, key, which is a string, and in any other data you want to store. So any other data you want to store about a photo, you can just throw in here as well. This key will just link us to AWS. And in here we can just say export default user profile model. And again, if you don't want a username here, Meteor has an implemented option for it. So you could also put the username here. It's just so you know. All right, now we have defined both of them. Now we need to implement creating the user. So we want to call the backend and say, hey, we have a user we want you to create, and the backend will go, good, I will create it. So here we just say index.ts, get.ts inside of methods, and then set.ts. So pretty much our get methods go here. This will get data from the database. Our set methods will go here. This will set data in the database. And in index, we'll just import both get, so get, as well as set. Note, index is an optional file, but it will make life easier later. Then inside of get, we can just go Meteor, import that, dot methods, and just create an empty one. It's not needed right now. Inside of set, we can go meteor.methods, and take note, this is just simply an object. So it's like going x1. It's just an object. So don't let the syntax we're going to be using confuse you, because it's just an object. When I first started with Meteor, I didn't understand the syntax at all until it clicked for me. It's simply just a regular JavaScript object. Now, how Meteor likes us to do things based on their tutorials and stuff, what I could figure out is they would prefer us to have our names be very descriptive in what they do, and oftentimes include like a period in them. But it depends on how you could go create new user. This is perfectly fine. If you want to do this, go right ahead, go for it. However, I have come up with a pretty good structure, which is set. So this is the type of method it is. Dot, then the method it belongs to, so this is user, so this is part of the users collection, dot create, and this is what it will do. And then we assign it the function, so a sync function, and you don't even need to specify function. You could also do an ES6 function here if you want. So it's perfectly fine to go as this, like this as well, and just make sure it's asynchronous. And then here is where you pass in any data you might want, and then here is where you execute server-side code. Now the data that you pass in, we just want to structure, because currently we don't know what data we're getting. So inside of the models, we're going to go here and say get methods, and here set methods. Then here we'll just export interface, and take note here. So this is the name we're using. We want to keep it as close to the name as possible, so when we call this from the front end, we don't need to remember what the model is called as well, because that's just two things we have to remember. We only need to remember one. So we're going to always follow this specific pattern. Method, to specify this model is for a method, then the method name, model, and just make sure to make this Pascal case. So it's method, the method name, model. If every single one of your models that are related to a method looks like this, you will never need to go search what that model is called when you call the method. And here we just want a couple things. We want the email, string. I'm going to copy and paste that a couple times. Password, first name, last name. You could make this optional depending on how you implemented your sign up. And then username. So here's all the data we want to send from the front end to the back end. So here we just say colon, and we specify it looks like this. And to make it even easier, if you forget what it's called, you can go method set user, and there it autocompletes for us. Boom. You just say method and you type out this, and it will autocomplete it for you if you're in VS Code. Then of course we can take in all of these details. Of course, if you didn't want to do this, you could also do, I guess, something like props. Similar to how you could do it on the front end and then just props.email and whatnot. But again, I like to destructure my things just to make it a little bit easier. Now, first we want to check that the data passed in is actually valid. So in terms of their data type. So we're going to check email and make sure to import check. Check comes from Meteor. Check email, and that's a string. This will make sure that if we pass in a number or undefined or whatever in here, it's going to say, hey, this check failed. You cannot continue with the function. And let's just do for the rest as well. And For the last name, because it might actually be optional depending on how you implement it, you might want to go match, which also comes from Meteor check, dot optional. So depending on how you implement it, last name may actually be an optional value. So if you did this to say a last name is optional, then you want to just make it optional here as well. And so just make sure everything is of the right type. Of course, you can go number if something needs to be a number, or Boolean if it's a true or false value, and so on. Next up, we want to check that the username only contains letters, numbers, and potentially an underscore. Now we might want to use this in a couple places in our code base, so I'm going to put it inside of utils. So here in utils, create a new folder called checks.ts. And in here, you just say export const string contains only letters and numbers. Feel free to make this a little bit shorter. And in here, we just want to pass in the string, and if we want to allow an underscore. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, my regex skill is terrible, so I'm just going to paste this. If allow underscore, then return this regex test. So it will test that there is only numbers and letters in here, or an underscore as well. And this here, if we don't allow the underscore, it will check that there's only letters and number in here, and if there's an underscore, it will fail the check. So that is what this does. Of course, feel free to add documentation to make your life easier when you come back to it in the future. And if you hover over it, you'll see you get all of these nice little documentation. Now that we have this, and make sure it's exported, we can call it here and just go if not, and we check it and make sure to import this. And don't feel scared about these like / imports. Meteor does in fact support them. And we can pass in the username to make sure it only contains valid data, and in true. And now that I think about it, you can call this on the front end as well. Because utils, just take note of this, is available both on the backend, which is the API here, as well as the front end, which is the UI. So whenever you put something in here, just make sure that it's available on both. So whatever you do here, just be very careful, because if you do something that's only usable on the server and you call it from the front end, which it is possible, it will be wonky. So here we check if it contains something like an @ symbol or brackets or something weird. We just return new meteor.error 400 saying username may only contain letters and numbers. This here is kind of a lot of effort to type out though, and we're going to do a ton of these, a ton of them. And you will need to remember these codes and whatnot. And if you wonder what these codes are, they are the website error codes. If we search that up from MDN, you can see all of these codes here. So the client error ones, 400 is a bad request, 401 is unauthorized, and so on and so on. I'm not really a big fan of having to remember these, so I'm going to create functions to do it for me. So here, let's go to our utils and just create a new file called server errors, because this is only available on this server. We're getting back to that part where some things are only available on the server. This does also mean you could in fact just put this here in server. This is also a perfectly fine place to put it, because it's then only available on the server mostly. So let's create a couple of them. Export const no auth error. So pretty much if they're not authorized to do something, like they're not logged in so they can't post, and we can include a message. So if we want to append a message to the error, and that will be throw new meteor.error 401, which is unauthorized, not authorized, and then either the message they passed in, or you are not authorized to make this change. All right, and there's going to be a couple of them, so I am just going to go like this. Doink. There we go. So we have a no auth error, and it we're also importing capitalized first letter from JSUtils. So we have a no auth error, which is a 401. We have a not found error, which is a 404. And this also has a category, which is like the title. For example, if a user is not found, you pass in the user text in here, and we'll say user could not be found, as an example. Internal server error, which is, hey, something went bad on the server, we can't continue. And then client content error, meaning, hey, you inserted a invalid username, and so on. So these are all the ones we're currently be using, but you can feel free to add more. And in here, instead of doing this, we can just say client content error, and then just pass in this. Now we don't need any of the other stuff because it will automatically do the rest for us. Then again, we are going to go const cleaned email, and this will be the email.trim. And you're probably wondering, why are we checking it again if we already checked it on the client? That is because sometimes you will get these malicious users which will in fact try to inject data which it shouldn't, that will bypass these checks on the front end. And this is just like an extra step to prevent whatever nasty data they try to send in from going in. Then we just go if not email regex.test cleaned email. So again, if there's an invalid email, return client content error. Email is invalid. And again, we can check if our password, the length is less than 8. Return client content error. Password is too short. Alright, and then we need to check, is there a user with this existing username? Now this is where we need to make sure that our collection actually exists in the database, because currently Meteor has created a user collection for us. So that's already in the database for us. But we don't have a user profile collection to store the user profile data. So we'll need to create it. To create it, it's simply new file, user profile. Feel free to call this index.ts as well. Const, and then just user profile collection. Make that equal to a new Mongo, which we import from Meteor, dot collection. And here we want to say user profile. And we also just specify it's going to look like the user profile model. And then we just export default user profile collection. This will create this collection in the database for us, and it's as easy as that. Then here we just go const existing username is equal to await. And in the user profile collection we just created, we just need to import that, dot find one async. You could also use just find one, but from Meteor version 3 this is discouraged. So use async instead, and then just await it. And then we just need to pass in how we want to search for it. So username, and we want to append an @ because we're going to save the usernames with @ in the database. And just pass in the username. This will go into the database and find one user with this username. So the username they passed in. Just remember to also clean the username. So const cleaned username is equal to username.trim. And also just remember to throw any checks in here. So if we go back to the signup page, it also has the length check, as well as any checks here that contains like, hey, you're not allowed to contain this data. Feel free to add this to the front end as well. But yeah, so we're just going to continue as is for now, because I see the time is starting to creep up on us. So let's go await accounts dot create user async. Take note here of the accounts. We want to import it from Meteor accounts base. And this will create an account for us. Note, if you do not have the accounts password package installed, which we did in a previous video, I highly recommend you install it right now. Then here we just need to pass in the data. So first we need to pass in the email as well as their password. And we also just need to check that existing username. So if not existing username, return, if existing. So if someone already exists with that username, because it needs to be unique, we can return client content error. This username is already taken. And in here we go const new user. So we're making a new user is equal to await meteor.users.find one async. So I want to find the user with this email, and that will be using emails.address. And the reason it looks like this is if we go to the user model, we go to the emails, their address. So it's emails.address. And that's why we're searching for it like that, because we need to do a search within something else. and then we just say email. So try and find this user we just created. And this will be as a user model, because this will be the default Meteor user model, which is not how ours look, or undefined. If not new user, then return not found. This could optionally also be an internal server error because the user was not found or was not created because we can't find it. So just something to take note. You might want to make this an internal server error rather than not found. And then we need to create their profile. So await user profile collection dot insert async, and we'll insert the user ID, which is the new user dot underscore ID, first name, and you might want to check and clean first name and as well and whatnot, last name, username, and this will be the @username. There we go. If you're getting like red squiggly lines of these async awaits, just run your program once and it should fix it. Alright, and that's how we create the user. Note that we did not actually set the profile ID on the user. I feel that's going to be a little bit of a workaround, so for right now, I'm just going to make this a question mark, because this might not be included. We'll just say enforced on the user profile collection. But depending on which one you choose, you might want to swap it out. Alright, note we don't need to create everything, so we don't need to provide the ID or the photo at the moment. It will automatically create the ID for us, and the photo will be added later. That's why it's an optional field. Now the user can be created. However, we cannot use this on the front end yet. We cannot call this. So to do that, we will need to create a new folder in in import, called startup. We already have one, cool. And startup will contain imports.ts. This is what we want to import in the server, so the server can know these things exist, because currently the server does not know any of this exists. So we just need to import /imports API user profile /methods. Note we don't need to specify get or set, that's in here, because, and we actually don't have anything in here. So let me just create an index.ts as well as a get.ts as well as a set.ts. And in here we can just import the get as well as the set. There we go. Note we don't need to actually specify the get or sets here because we have our index which automatically gets imported, so we don't have to specify index here. So it automatically gets imported from here, and our index imports these two. So in turn, these two will also be imported when we import our index. Alternatively, if it's a little complicated, you can also just go get, and then as well do set. It's just we're going to have a ton of these, so it's going to become really cluttered if you do this. So I'd recommend just using your index. We also want to do it for users, and this will be the methods we want to import. You can also do the databases or collections via import. And again, you don't need to use /, but since Meteor supports it, I'm going to use it because it makes my life a ton easier. API and then the user profile. And then user profile. Again, you could have called this index if you wanted to. We don't need to do this for the users, however, because Meteor has already handled that for us in the backend. It already has all that support for us, so we don't have to worry about it. And here's for publications, which we won't be doing right now. Now that we have that, we need to go to our main.ts, which is in our server folder, and we need to say import /imports /startup imports. There we go. And this will import all of that to our backend, allowing us to actually access this method we just created and any other methods that we create in the future. So this pretty much connects our backend to our frontend. And again, if you don't want to use this imports file, you could just go imports /API /user profile /user profile, and then for the rest as well. But again, it's going to become very cluttered if you do it like that. Now that we have that, let's try and use it from the front end. So let's just go here and get the name of what it is. So there we go. So here under where it says logging into true, we are just going to go a try. This will catch any errors that might happen. And we want to call Meteor. So import Meteor dot call as sync. So we're going to call in a synchronous function, not the regular call. And we pass in this piece of text, which is in our set. So whatever it's called here. Now we don't know what data we should pass in. So we say const data is method set user create, and there it auto completes for us. Life's so easy, we don't have to even try. Email, that should be a comma, and there we go. And we can just pass in the cleaned email, the cleaned first name, the password, because password doesn't change, cleaned username, and cleaned last name. Note here, I'm not specifying colon password because JavaScript supports just doing this if they're both called the same thing. Now that we have this data, we can just pass it in. Bob's your uncle. Make sure to await this call that is happening. And this should be in a synchronous function, otherwise it cannot use await. Now when the error might occur, we need to be able to know that. So we can say set logging in to false. And then also just do a return. And here we want like a way to handle errors no matter from where they come. So we want a structured way that we can manage all our errors, because we don't want to rewrite this whole same thing over and over again. So here in utils, we'll create a new folder called errors.ts. And because of time constraints, I'm just going to paste this here for now. And just import messages from ant_design, as well as check string empty from JSUtils. What this will do is it will take the Meteor error, which is returned from the server in case an error happens. It will then also take any backup reason. So in case that error does not return a specific reason, this will give us the backup reason. And these two are optional. You can remove this from the tutorial and it will not affect the tutorial at all. Okay. So if you don't want that there, you don't need it there. But they will just show pop-up models in case you want to show pop-up models. So I'm not going to cover them. It's just React. So don't worry too much about them. Then here we have a message.error. So if the error happens, we'll see an error message with the details or reason, or if none of those are provided, the backup reason. We'll also check if the string is empty, and either of these will also console log the whole error, just so we know what to look for if everything's empty. So we can then just go look in the console. Now that's all this does, is just basic error response. So we just go error response. You pass in the error as a meteor.error, because in general, all of them should in fact be a meteor error if we call it from an asynchronous function here, from this call. And then the backup reason would be could not create user account. Alright, so now we can create accounts, and let's actually go open up our MongoDB Compass. And you'll notice we have a local one right here, and if I were to just go edit connection, you'll see it's just MongoDB local 3001 Meteor. That's all it is. So if I go like this, confirm, a little bit darker, might be easier to see. We can connect to that, and in Meteor, you'll notice we have links, which is the previous collection that we're not using anymore, and in the users. And we try and sign up, so I'm going to say nick@gmail.com, nick password. Oh, our password is not hidden. Anyways, sign up. We actually get no confirmation that it worked, but if we refresh here, there we go. So Nick was in fact created. There we go. And the user profile does in fact contain all of Nick's details. But now if we were to try and create another user with the same username, and also let's just fix our password input. And we can do that by just going input.password. This will make it a password specific input. So if we go there, then you'll notice it's a password input now. So we do that. If we try and do the same thing, first of all, this username is already taken. Okay, let's make it to Nick too. Sign up. Something went wrong. Please check your credentials. This is most likely because we already have a nick@gmail.com. We're just not handling it, but we already have a Nick. So we go Nick too. Sign up. And there we go. We might just want to do something so we know it actually works. Message.success account created. Now if we, okay, let's make this Nick32, sign up, account created. That makes it so much easier. So the account was actually created. Now what's actually happening? So after we do all of our checking, we go here and we call this method from the backend. Make sure that if you did not import it on the main server, you might get an error. So we call this from the backend. If we go search for this on the backend, all this does is it checks, make sure everything is in fact correct and what data that is passed in is in fact valid. Then we pass in our username. You might want to make this forced lowercase so people can't have like the same username but just a different casing. But this is a basic tutorial. We're not going to cover every single scenario. Then here we actually create the account using the Meteor account package. We just pass in the email and the password. And here we find that new user we created. Make sure we actually did create them and we can find them. And then we created a profile for them, which will store all of their details, including their username, their first name, their profile photo, and a bunch of other details related to the user. But we cannot actually log in yet. So in the next video, we'll be covering login and a bunch of other things. And yeah, I'll see you all again in the next meteorjs tutorial. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all again in the next tutorial.